Gentleman, text Mr. Hensarling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, myself and a number of people on our side of the aisle continue to be very concerned about handing what we view as rather draconian powers to an unelected representative to decide upon subjective terms what financial products that our fellow citizens can enjoy. Clearly, many of you at the panel today don't seem to have that same concern. I guess my first line of question then would be, I've heard a number of people talk about unfair and fair, but again, those are very nebulous and amorphous terms. And Mr. Calhoun, I believe I heard you say if the CFPA had been in existence a number of years ago, we probably would not have had this economic turmoil. I, for one, believe if it had been in effect a number of years ago, we probably wouldn't have ATM machines, frequent flyer miles, and the list goes on. But the first question I would have, given that incredible draconian powers are being suggested to be transferred to this government agency, what are your views on what is fair and unfair? For example, payday lending. Is payday lending per se unfair? Mr. Shelton? Yes, no, no opinion?
Well, I do have an opinion. The first part of the opinion...
I'm sorry, you do or you do not?
I have an opinion.
Okay, yes, sir.
My opinion is very well that payday lending is absolutely necessary, which is why the demand is so high. However, payday lending is extremely unfair, and that the APR, if you factor throughout most states, ends up being astronomical.
So I'm sorry, it's needed, but it's unfair.
Absolutely.
So if it's unfair, it could be
way,
outlawed by the CFPA, so they could outlaw something that's needed.
Well,
Is that what you're
outlawing and
telling me?
regulating can be two different things. That very well what we're looking for is compliance among those who provide this service.
But I assume your
provide a fair
association
product. Then indeed, that's
has
the
read the
conversation we've
proposed
had.
statutory language. Does it not say that this agency would have the power to make these products unlawful? Maybe they wouldn't, but do they not have the power?
And some of the products should be made unlawful.
Well, let me ask you about that. I come from Dallas, Texas. Their $200 Ace Cash Express payday loan would carry $60.76 total finance charge, which would be 30.4%. Is that unfair? Should that, if you were advising the CFPA, which I believe is going to have some kind of advisory council, would you advise them to make this product unlawful?
If we're talking about APR of 30%, then I would say that it should be considered fair.
That would be considered, how about 40%, 50%? Where does it become unfair?
I think you're running too
Shelton?
high then. I think even the federal government and this particular committee basically set a 36% cap on loans for people in the military. We think that's a good, fair place to begin the conversation.
Let me ask you this question. Is it, I'm sorry, Bowdler?
Bowdler.
Bowdler, I'm sorry, I'll go to you next. I saw your hand up. Let's talk about credit cards for the moment. This committee has moved on legislation passed into law that essentially will prescribe universal default. Now, clearly, if one looked in the marketplace, you could find credit cards that had universal default provisions that had lower interest rates than cards that didn't carry universal default. Is universal default, is that unfair or abusive? And if my facts are correct that one could have received a credit card with a lower percentage rate had it been in there, is it still unfair and abusive?
That's not really the approach that NCLR would recommend taking when it comes to those kinds of products.
Can you pull the mic a little closer to you, please? Thank you.
So what I was saying is that's not really the approach we would recommend taking. What we recommended in our testimony is that we need to spot trends that have disparate impact. So if we look at the use of various products and it's having routinely a negative effect on our community, then what we would rather see is that products that have a less disparate impact be promoted and made more
So you don't
available.
necessarily know whether it would be fair or unfair. You would look at its disparate impact. Previously, we've had testimony, I believe it's probably a few years ago, from a representative of the U.S. Hispanic Chamber who said a large number of their members capitalize small businesses with credit cards. And so if the CFPA were to outlaw certain credit cards, and that led to less capital for small businesses, which employed fewer Hispanics. Would that be of concern to you in your organization?
Outlawing products, NCLR has never advocated for the banning of any product from the market. I understand that CFPA has that power. That's not, again, that's not our approach. But what my concern is that there are a lot of good credit cards, good mortgages, good short-term loans that are gathering dust and never see the light of day because bad practices actually replace them in the market. So if we can get incentives to get those more positive products that actually build wealth in small businesses, in modest income homes, that's what we want to do.
The gentleman from Kansas.